Good morning and welcome to Restart Michigan webinar with PwC. Returning to the workplace safely, the new normal. This is Marnita Harris. I'm Director of Engagement with the Detroit Regional Chamber, and I would like to thank you all for joining the session this morning. The Chamber launched this series of webinars to help businesses across the state prepare to return to work and restart operations. I would like to thank PwC, our guest speakers, and for their time and sharing their expertise. Before we get started, I want you to know that all participants are on mute, but you are able to submit questions to the speakers through the box that is located in your webinar on the side. You can submit questions directly and they will answer as we go along, and there will be a Q&A session at the end. I will now turn over the webinar to Julie, and she will share the information for the presentation for this morning. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Julie Bogas, and I am a Detroit-based PwC partner. I work typically with consumer products, retail, medical device, and automotive clients, helping with planning and actually executing large-scale technology-enabled transformations, often with a regulatory angle. But the last month or so, I've spent most of my time talking to clients around what might the new normal be as we get back to work as we know it. We know many of you do have people in many of your facilities right now, whether they're distribution centers, plants, otherwise. But we also know that there are lots of changes ahead. So I've had the opportunity to talk to lots of clients about this, and we've got some thoughts that we're excited to share with you today. Brian?
So hi there, good morning. I'm Brian Decker. I'm also a partner based here in Detroit. My focus is almost exclusively automotive, working with a number of OEMs and tier one suppliers, both here in Detroit and in throughout the US. Like Julie, I spend a lot of my time normally focused on transformation, a lot of it around finance systems and processes. But as we've looked at what's been happening over the last 6 weeks, there have been a lot of conversations that I've been part of around how should we be thinking about getting back to the new normal, both from a manufacturing perspective as well as from an office perspective. And we'll spend most of our time talking about that this morning. Right?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Ray Telang. I'm the managing partner of PwC's office in Detroit. I apologize for not being on video, but I had some technological issues this morning, which didn't allow me to do that. I think we've all experienced a bit of that over the course of the last 8 weeks or so. I've had the pleasure in my roles of working with the Chamber in a number of capacities over the past 20 years, and want to thank Sandy, Tammy, Megan, and their very talented team for all the work that they have done to pivot their programming over the last couple months in order to keep their members and our community up to date with the current thinking of policymakers and business leaders as we all work through these unprecedented times. Over the course of the last 8 weeks, I've also had the opportunity to connect with a number of business and community leaders in the state of Michigan. And beyond that, our firm has also solicited feedback from multiple times over that time period from CFOs and finance executives to seek their feedback on the current feelings and situation and what they were, number one, experiencing today, but also what they're thinking about going into the future, recognizing all the uncertainty that's out there. Marnita, since I can't see it, and whoever's clicking the slides, if you could click it to the next slide, that would be great. The themes that I've heard, and as well as the firm has collected, are very similar. All of us continue to be very focused on the health and safety of our families and our people. And currently, we are now focused on how and when to safely reopen the workplace. Another consistent theme is that when we do open or reopen the workplace, there will be a massive amount of change. Our leaders expect it, and our people do as well. As you can see from the excerpt and from the slide, this is an excerpt from the most recent survey from last week. Most finance execs expect changes to include things like no surprise, new safety measures, creative ways of rotating teams of people into the office, into the workplace, and of course, the introduction potentially of new tools that will help enable processes that were historically manual to be more automated. In addition, you'll see that approximately 43% of those surveyed are planning to incorporate flexibility into their workplaces permanently. A different question that was asked also suggested that roughly 3/4 of those same executives have indicated that same flexibility has helped prepare them for not only the uncertainty of the future, but to win in the future as well. So no surprise that almost half of the executives plan to incorporate some level of that flexibility into their permanent plans. The conversation today that will hopefully make that experience a bit more real, as Julie and Brian will take you through a day in the life of a typical employee in our new normal. So with that, I'm going to flip it back to you, Julie, and you can begin to take the group through the slides.
Thanks, Ray. So as Ray mentioned, our intent today is to talk about how the office environment likely will be different when many of us that have been working from home return to it in the coming months, and really focus in on what our employees' thoughts and concerns as they think to that point, whether some companies will be sooner than others, but what are employees thinking in advance of that return, and then also some considerations as that you should be thinking about as you're contemplating your planning. So just to align on what a typical day is, nothing exciting here, but our employee Amy shows up for work, and this is a typical day pre-COVID-19. So Amy shows up for work, enters the building, scans badge, walks through some sort of turnstile or entry, and she's in. She may join, if you work in a taller building, what can be a very large group of people waiting for an elevator at high traffic entry and exit times. And after that, in her company's newer open office seating, she finds an open touchdown seat in the area that her team usually sits and gets set up for the day. At some point in the morning, she heads over and grabs some coffee and water from an open break room station, and she's excited to have lunch with a friend of hers from her last role in the corporate cafeteria. But then after that, she's got to head out to another building for an afternoon of meetings and another one of her company's corporate locations. Pretty typical. I think we've all had mornings like this before. What we want to think about today is what might be different. So upon arrival, whereas she used to open the door with her hand and scan her badge and maybe walk through a turnstile she has to touch, our clients are definitely thinking about, in PwC as well, as how do we make it so not so many people show up at the same time? So we may have scheduled arrival times to control that human traffic flow. If your building allows for it, thinking about options for touchless entry. And then probably the two number one things that I think most of the clients I've talked to, almost all of the clients I've talked to are arriving at are some sort of screening to try to prevent sick people from coming into the workplace as one step in a system of controls. So that will likely include temperature screening, which might take a variety of forms, either thermal temperature scans or even giving every employee a thermometer to take their own temperature at home. And then also some sort of self-health questionnaire where we're asked about symptoms and temperature and exposure prior to coming into the workplace. These screening controls among the employees that we've talked to, and we've also done a survey, certainly can prompt concerns around, how are you using this health information you're getting from me on a daily basis? Where are you storing it? What are you doing with it? And in fact, survey we also did just last week, a separate survey of what we called the Employee Pulse Survey, asked employees about the topic of temperature checks, and about a quarter of the respondents did say that they were concerned about temperature checks when they arrive on site to potentially track symptoms.
Julie, as we think about the changes that you talk about, both on the left side of the screen around the scheduled arrival times and things like that, as well as concerns from people, from employees about how you're going to use this health information and anything else. You know, it highlights the need for an effective and well thought out change management approach. So these are going to be some big changes to how people work. You know, even as I think about it, you know, I like to arrive when I arrive, and some days that's 7:30 and some days that's 8:30. It depends on what I've got going. The idea that I need to be there at 7:50 or 8:15 because we're trying to manage elevator load and social distancing is a big change, and it has a big impact across a number of areas. So trying to think through that on a very structured change management way is going to be really important.
Absolutely. One of the things we wanted to share with you is a couple of things that we are planning to do. Currently, PwC US, we have no employees working in our 70-some offices in the US. We are all working from home. So this is still in the planning stage, but we do expect to be using and have developed a return to work assessment that will ask employees and anyone else, frankly, coming into our building on a given day about a few things that could be an indicator that someone may have COVID-19. So things such as the list of symptoms from the CDC that we're all getting pretty familiar with. Do you have an elevated temperature over 100 degrees? Do you have knowledge of exposure? And actually, have you been tested for COVID-19? To get a green light, if you will. And really the intent here, we're doing it in an app. It's really a web-enabled web page that renders like an app. And at the end, our employees will be given a green light to enter the workplace if they've indicated that they're healthy. And if you've indicated that no, you aren't feeling well and you do have one of the symptoms, the employee will be prompted with more information on what to do. One, here's how you should probably reach out to your doctor, for example, to communicate to your supervisor or any other avenue or channel that a company might want an employee to report at this point. We're doing this in a private way, not storing the responses, and really the intent is to not storing the responses given to an individual person attributed there. We will aggregate the results so we can understand trends across locations and business units and in the aggregate. And this is something that we are making available to clients too. I've talked to many clients that have other ways of doing this through different enterprise applications they already have, as well as other form technologies.
Hey, Julie, quick question. I'll jump in, and as long as we have time, we'll throw them in as they come in. So, got a question on whether we have a concern about people becoming numb to the questions. The example is the questions that we fill out when we come in from an immigration perspective.
That's a great question, and yes, please feel free to submit the questions, and as long as we can manage them, we'll do them as we go. That's great. Yes, that is definitely always a concern, and actually 2 clients I talked to yesterday. I would say this has increased as we've gotten closer to thinking about it, and these were particular clients that were thinking about using our tool. They wanted to know, can we change the questions on a regular basis and how hard it is? And that is definitely something probably in that change management approach to think about of how do you keep, use it both as a training, because the questions are also hopefully educating people on things to think about, but also keep people paying attention.
One other question, Julie, and we'll move on, which is question around privacy of temperature check data and things like that if you're scanning people's stuff as they come in.
Yes, yeah, and we're not here to give legal advice right now, so we definitely would suggest you work with your appropriate legal counsel. But one of the things we are doing is we're not storing the results. So if I did answer a question that said, yes, I have a temperature over 100 degrees, or if I walked through the thermal scanner and I registered over 100 degrees, we're not storing that result anywhere associated with my name. The one thing we are going to do in our app for the questionnaire to allow for really just understanding the landscape would be to store the end result. So you can see the number of green lights, if you will, to go in versus the number of people that did report that they were experiencing symptoms or did have a temperature, with an optional email address that could be provided. But at any time, an employee could avoid revealing who they are.
Perfect. Thanks.
So moving on to the rest of the morning here, Amy has entered the building now, and a few things that are going to be different that probably already would have been on the other side is face masks. I think we've all heard a lot about face masks, and most of the clients I talk to are, at least in the near term, planning for employees to wear face masks, and that's largely because of the areas like elevators where maintaining social distance is not necessarily possible. Social distancing needs apply throughout the workplace, and so companies are developing social distancing policies and guidelines using some of the floor markers that, if you're someone that does go to the store, you've probably seen some of those, just to keep people being more conscious, and then going all the way through to some of the things you may have read about, a few companies exploring wearables that would alert us if we got too close to one another. But elevators are tough. So companies thinking about what they can do if they did have an opportunity for more touchless or voice activated, but that's probably not possible in all buildings quickly. And even using attendance. So trying to reduce the number of people pushing the button and also control the flow of how many people get in an individual elevator. And then of course, if the building isn't too tall, encouraging use of the stairs where people could be more adequately spaced. But one thing we hear from employees, and you can see it just in the general public, is these are brand new policies and everyone's probably not going to follow them. They're tough to follow. It's hard to wear a face mask all day. It's hard to maintain a 6-foot distance in different parts of the building. So you will probably have employees that are concerned, but at the same time, our survey showed that actually more than 50% of employees surveyed around the US said that they would like employers to provide personal protective equipment.
So if we think about this a little bit, what we're going to have here is a need for training for folks who are coming back. So not only is that training in advance of coming back, on how to wear a mask, what social distancing looks like. We've all had a chance to experience it, but it is going to be a little bit different in the workplace. Thinking through what that means relative to an office setup. You think of restrooms, you think of kitchen areas, you think of all kinds of that kind of stuff. And then thinking about from a reporting perspective, you're going to have, and I think we've probably all seen it in our lives outside of work. You've got some people who are, frankly, 6 feet to them to us is 2 feet, right? Their idea of 6 feet is a lot less than mine. I've seen other people whose idea of 6 feet to me is more like 10 feet. And so their HR is going to have to know how to handle those things that come in when people say, it almost sounds like the old playground, right? He's too close to me, she's too close to me, they're touching my stuff. But HR is going to have to be thinking about how to handle it. And there's, again, a training element both for everybody, but also a training element for HR as well.
Thanks, Brian. Moving through the morning, Amy's taken her elevator ride, stopped, talked to a colleague in the hallway, and then found her spot in that open workspace I mentioned. Probably some big differences here. So many of us have moved to more open workspaces where we may be reverting more to workspace assignments. So people are sitting in the same place, keeping their germs to themselves on a day-to-day basis, or using hoteling systems where people can check in and it can be managed a little bit more. Where social distancing isn't possible, putting up some partitions and of course closing off different areas. And this is an area that we do understand that employees are really wondering about. They think about how they have moved to these combined spaces, and now as they approach returning to work, maybe wondering how you will cover that in your work environment. Nearly 50%, nearly half, 45% of the employees that we surveyed did say they want employers to reconfigure to promote that physical distancing between workers.
And again, that's just going to highlight the need for communication as we think about, and we've just moved here to this concept of common areas, but thinking about the communication you're going to have, upfront and then reinforce on a regular basis, and thinking as well about how are you going to handle team meetings and some of those mid-size and larger gatherings that tend to be a big part of the value of working, in person, is that ability to get together. We've all gotten better at things like this, but still trying to think through what are those caps and those limits on terms of how people are going to get together.
Well, I know, Brian, we're also, and Julie, we're also, thinking about those collaboration spaces in a different way as well. As we think about the social distancing and converting them to physical workspaces where capacity constraints require it. and taking it out of the pool of potential quote unquote meeting rooms, if you will, and giving people individual space that may be a little bit larger than what they would have had, but necessary given the limitations.
Thanks, Ray. And for those following along here, I clicked too early, but moving on to the next slide here. And it just says actually Ray is segued to here. Common areas are also going to be a huge factor. And you just think about your typical morning, how frequently you did enter one of these areas. So in the example here, Amy's going to get her coffee and water, which I'm getting frequently throughout the day. In the past, I would have probably set my phone down on the counter while I had both hands and was juggling that. Potential changes we'll see or need to contemplate in our workplaces are reminding all of us of safe hygiene practices. So one way to do that might be if you did have an app or a portal where employees are going in for that self-health check, you can give reminders of safe hygiene work practices there. Of course, other communication channels. Lots of our clients are thinking about moves to more visibility in cleaning and sanitation. So the ability for employees to actually maybe even possibly go to an app to see where the workplace was last changed, or even just more visible indicators of cleaning personnel there during the day, or signs that indicate how frequently an area is cleaned. And where you're not able to get to a level of cleaning and sanitation that you think is necessary given the risk at this point, you may be closing off some of those areas. And this is really an area where we say, I mean, I personally haven't spent much time cleaning my own workspace, but we know that employees might think about, well, how do I know this is clean? Can I clean it myself? So what cleaning supplies do we have available for me to even sanitize my phone or clean the space that I'm sitting on a given day? And half the employees surveyed did want some level of assurance about cleanliness and disinfecting procedures.
So, and I think that's interesting because, as Julie mentioned, and there's actually a question here as well about, we all have most all of us have cleaning services that come in at night, and you never know exactly how clean things are. I know in our office, occasionally, you go into the break room and the person before you perhaps wasn't as neat as they could have been, and there's a little coffee on the counter, or clearly it's been used, and trying to think through how are you going to monitor that? How are you going to get that cleanliness done? Do you have supplies that you need, right? Just thinking through in terms of, do you have supplies for phones? Do you have supplies for, countertops and Clorox wipes and all the necessary things in enough quantity and in enough locations so that people are confident and comfortable? Because a big part of all of return to work, and I think we'll talk about it a little bit more, is making sure employees are comfortable and confident that they're safe. And so those things, are going to be important just to make sure that emotional well-being can be maintained.
Moving on to lunchtime. So a pretty typical activity of getting together with someone you maybe haven't seen in a little while and having lunch in the office cafeteria. A few things that we'll see differently here is where possible, maybe moving to touchless payments, badge scanning, some of you already have in your environments. The food service itself, there's a lot to think about probably with your food service providers that you may have in your building, but changes where open buffets where we're all serving ourselves probably is a consideration at this time. So you may actually have to close some cafeteria stations, or perhaps they're actually attended stations versus self-serve. And kind of back to the limiting freedom to move about as we wish, you may need to think about how to limit how many people are in an area at one time by using even a lunch reservation system as one example. And this brings up an area where it's going to be important to balance, and Brian's already alluded in some areas, employees are thinking different things. There are a wide variety of wants and needs and thoughts on how we go back to the workplace. And you definitely will have employees that are thinking, I miss the way it used to be. I liked my old cafeteria options. I liked the ability to go whenever I wanted to. But then you do also have those employees, and our survey showed here that nearly 40% of us do want our employers to close off high-risk areas that cannot be adequately disinfected, and a salad bar might be one of those examples.
So I think, Julie, in this one, what we need to think about is, gathering feedback from, and kind of almost at an office level of what's important to people and what's not, and how do you try to manage. There's certain things people may think are important that we just can't work through, but others, how can we get as close to old normal as possible while still creating the appropriate level of safety and cleanliness, and covering for those folks who in fact are a little less comfortable than others, because you're going to get a wide range of folks and their level of comfort. Julie, on this one, we got a question that came in as well about people who saying, what about the idea of say a virus getting on shoes or clothing or something else when people go out to lunch and then come back? We've already said, you already talked about some of those things when people come into the office in the morning. How about when if they want or need to go out of the office for lunch, or for a cigarette break, for any number of reasons why people leave the office and come back. How big an issue, or do we have any perspectives on that?
Well, actually, it probably brings us to the next slide here. As throughout the hypothetical but fairly typical, fairly boring scenario of Amy's morning here, Amy has had exposure to a number of people that we never really even thought about before. I mean, it's pretty typical for us to join a flow of people walking in at the same time, and it might be hundreds of us, and we're pretty close going through the door there. If you work in a big building, you have probably crammed on an elevator because you didn't want to wait 5 minutes to get the next one. Even in the hallways, stop and talk to people who then went their different directions and then encountered another 10 people. Going out to lunch is a perfect example of that. So the more exposure to the more people does increase the risk. But there is going to be that balance there, right, of you can only control so much of employees. At some point you're going to get a lot of unhappy people to the extent you're restricting their movements completely. So that communication and the back and forth that we'll actually talk a little bit more about will be critical here. That is one of the reasons that contact tracing, that PwC and some of our clients are definitely thinking about ways to do this with as much precision as possible. So contact tracing is something you've probably seen in the news, and it really at its heart is procedures that if your company did have any cases of COVID-19 that has either come up in your facilities that are still working, or your office buildings, before going to work from home, you actually probably already did this. The CDC guidance does say that you do need to endeavor to inform employees if they have exposure to COVID-19. So you probably, like what PwC was doing in March, did undertake procedures to, if someone self-reported that they had tested positive for COVID-19, to interview them about what are all the places you went during the set period of time. Who are all the people you can remember seeing? And as you can imagine, this is difficult to remember. I can barely remember what I ate for dinner last night. And you, in many cases, are talking to someone who could be really sick. So it's unpleasant for both people. So thinking about how you do that better and more efficiently, and maybe have some procedures in the office that help people to remember. But the going out to lunch is just another case. That would be one thing that would need to be recalled to some extent by someone who later came down ill. And that's where automatic contact tracing comes in. And again, there's a few things you see in the news. One are community-based, so where a public health authority or a government may try to either have a voluntary or required in some countries contact tracing tool that would be able to, when someone self-reports, or I guess if depending on how much authority you had, but when a known case of COVID-19 is out there, a prompt is pushed to a mobile phone. That's different than business contact tracing. But this does bring up, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a second, but many of you are probably thinking already, well, wait a minute, is my employer going to track what I'm doing all day? Are they going to track me when I'm not at work? This must be balanced with the fact that half of us do want to be informed immediately when a colleague has tested positive for COVID-19. And Brian, I think I'll go into talking a little bit more about what automatic contact tracing is before people wonder too much about how this is. So PwC, when we had our first cases of COVID-19 and in the US, they were in our New York office, which is our largest office. So it took us more than 20 hours over a couple days to do interviews, look at badge access records, and frankly, ultimately ended up telling, because we couldn't get particularly precise, we told 2,000 people that they may have had some exposure because they were on these floors that the infected person had been on, and we asked them to work from home for 2 weeks. Ultimately, we all ended up working from home shortly after that. But as we look to the future, that approach was not at all precise. And there could be productivity impacts that were greater than they needed to be. So our Internet of Things team actually took an application for a different type of location or geo-tracking tool that they'd already built for other matters, and said, hey, we could do this better. So what we have set up is a tool called ACT that PwC is going to use. It is also available to clients that will allow us to conduct contact tracing and identify employees that have been exposed to COVID-19 much faster and more precisely using mobile phones as a beacon. So there's 2 ways it does this. One is there's an app, a very simple download app that is set up on each employee's device, and then it will be used as a beacon to understand the proximity to other mobile phones. And then it's also using signals, ambient signals in the environment, we don't think about very much, but you probably realize even in your own home right now, there are all sorts of wireless signals, whether it's from your TV, your Alexa, your kids' phones, other connected devices, that in a built footprint give us more indication of where somebody is for the purpose only of knowing how close they were to someone else. So it's comparing my wares to Brian's wares to understand whether we were in close proximity to each other, marrying that up with the beaconing. What we're not doing is tracking. It actually only understands that location information to see if we're in the same place as someone, and stores that anonymously, and only to be matched up when if I were to report a case of, self-report myself as a case of COVID-19, HR could then enter my email address in a portal that would then be matched to that unique identifier, that would then be matched to my proximity data, and then an analysis run to see who else had that same, who was in proximity with the beacon, or who else had some of those same patterns of where we were likely in the same place, and also doing an analysis for the amount of time that we were together. That allows us to much more precisely identify employees that could have been in close proximity versus calling out a whole business. But we're not distributing the infected person's name. That's something you have to be very careful of, even in your manual contact tracing procedures. So Brian, did you get any questions in on that one, probably?
Nothing has come in yet, Julie. Probably will, but wait. No. The question is, does our ACT app continue to track if the phone has been shut off?
It does not continue to track as the phone has been shut off. So the great question, and goes back to that overall change management program. It also doesn't track if you're outside the office location. So in this case, we are geocoding to our offices alone. And that is for privacy. You could do the proximity tracing beyond your campus, but for PwC and most of our clients that are signing on to this are doing the office location specifically. So that's where your change management does need, and your adoption program does need to include things such as signage to remind employees that don't turn your phone off. We do expect that you have your phone on when you are in our office environment for the purpose of our contact tracing solution. Which in some ways, I think a lot of people are thinking of it as we are protecting privacy. There is no data other than what are these proximity signals that occur during the day, and they're only associated with my name in the case that I either was a person who's infected or an exposed person, and then that's purged. But then we're also thinking about how does that also allow us some freedom, such as people are going to go back to their life, but then we know we will have some exposures, but we have a better way to inform people and hopefully retain productivity at the same time that we're reducing risk by being more precise in who perhaps if this is our protocol, ask to stay home after an exposure.
I think we've got a couple more questions that have come in on this one, Julie. So let me.
Brian, while you're looking at that.
Yeah, Ray, go ahead.
So, Julie, as you think about the two criterion, it's the beacon is looking for contact with another beacon. That's one, and the second one is time. Do you have examples of how people would be thinking about risk rating? Who ought to be contacted, and where perhaps the risk is lower and may not need to be contacted.
Yeah, this is one where I think we'll see some evolution as we all get better at, well, it'd be a great case if we prepare for the risk and we don't have to do a whole lot of this, but depending on the volume of contact tracing that is done, and unfortunately a lot of predictions do show that we should be prepared for other outbreaks in the coming months or even year until we have a vaccine. Right to your point, that proximity score is looking at how close the devices were to each other and for how long. And you will get back a high, medium, low rating. So that high would show that if it was Brian and my device that were then translated to our names, that we were in close proximity for, let's say, more than our current setting, which is configurable. It is more than 30 minutes and within close quarters, within that social distancing range. As you go down to the low, it could be one or the other. The lowest end, the devices saw each other at some point, but there wasn't a long duration and it maybe wasn't close contact, and medium somewhere in between. That would allow the employer to take on different protocols. Many are taking a wait and see approach right now. Let's see what we would get back to see at first blush, would we still send high, medium, and low the same message that we're asking them to stay out of the workplace? But for those lows, maybe we could have them be on notice of this, but if they would prefer, we might be okay with them coming into the office, but also it will depend. It's a learning exercise to see what we get over time.
So Julie, just a question or two here. One question is, would this affect staff with company cell phones? I'm assuming you would probably put it on the company cell phone. You would put the app on it, but I'll defer to you.
Yeah, so our particular product will work on any cell phone. So it does not need to be a company device. In fact, PwC's devices are all bring your own device. And it doesn't actually even need to be set up other than ability to download from the mobile device management system to get the app itself. In cases where there are employees who do not have personal phones or even are not allowed to carry them, one immediate option that some of our clients are exploring is getting very low cost Android, the lowest cost Android devices, to use those on a checkout basis. Our roadmap does include looking into different types of tokens or wearables, but that would be a couple months out. But the immediate option is getting basically the least expensive mobile device and then checking that out to employees.
And is that, Julie, how we would handle kind of visitors as well, or, which is a somewhat of a different issue, but.
It's fine. We're all spread out over Metro Detroit and the region. I've got very loud thunder behind me, so I don't know if others of you have that or not. So visitors and guests are definitely a factor. So the checkout of the device is one option. And in fact, that was a conversation I was having last night of a client trying to think to do that. You could also ask a visitor to download the app. Like in the case of PwC, for example, where we might be a frequent visitor or a contractor, you have a badge to our client site, I would not be surprised. We are going to be asked for all sorts of different health and safety protocols that we didn't have before. This could be one of them, that they would ask that we did download their automatic contact tracing app on our devices as a visitor.
Okay. In the interest of time, I may have one more question before we're done, but why don't we keep going? I want to make sure that we respect everybody's time.
Yeah, and we're getting there. And what this really brings us to, we've talked about a lot today, with new things that are very different, like the potential for automatic contact tracing, things that make the work environment, frankly, not as exciting to actually go to anymore because of certain restrictions that need to be in place. I walked through our whole journey, Amy's journey map, but we're going back to one thing that might happen is Amy may not actually go to work. At 8:20, instead of heading into the office, she could just be setting up with her team on video conference like we all are now. So we definitely expect to see, and you've seen in the news even a lot of tech clients who have told their tech companies that have told employees that they can expect to work from home from the end of the year if they so choose. See some of that, but then also, as Ray mentioned in the onset, of thinking about these jobs that have worked actually really well from working from home, and people who might be interested in permanent work from home. And no surprise here, there are plenty of employees who are not comfortable returning to the workplace immediately. So basically half told us that if requested to return tomorrow, they would have some fears of getting sick at the workplace. So definitely thinking about remote work as a strategy most companies are considering.
And and as you think about the remote work strategy, as well as the idea of that spectrum of people in terms of their level of comfort returning, that's again going to put some pressure on both policy and procedure, but HR as well, to know how do you I'm uncomfortable enough. You'll have some folks who have pre-existing conditions or family members they're taking care of or other things that you need to understand. You need to have a practice so that you can consistently apply whatever your policy is, but you got to be able to apply it consistently.
That's right. And in the interest of time, I'm going to go quickly here. We do also have built into the same application where we're doing the self-health survey, something you might want to consider for your business as well. Series of very simple and rapid to answer for a continued distributed work at home workforce of, do you have what you need today to be fully enabled to work? So this is an avenue where employees could report challenges with internet connectivity, or even particularly in the early days, challenges with childcare, but which may continue into the summer. And we're really doing that at an aggregate or business unit level, again, unless the employee opts in, for purposes of planning and understanding productivity or productivity concerns, where there might be people that are either having connectivity to challenges or childcare, as just two examples. And we included this mostly for your reference. This is showing Amy both with before and today, but as we tried to illustrate, it's a broad combination of policies, new practices, supporting technology, and of course an overall change management approach that will be necessary as we bring people back to an office workplace. And one of the key things to focus on here, a few takeaways to consider in your communications, is 42% of employees told us that they do want a way for their employer to give them, they want their employer to give them a way to provide feedback on all of these changes if they are going to feel comfortable going back to a work location. And this can take many forms. It can take a Q&A box, and email people can email, frequent all hands meetings, different types of communications portals where employees can go to for the latest information. Lots of options there, but really making sure that we have avenues to listen to employees before coming back and as we are going back and making all of the necessary adjustments.
So Julie, just maybe we've got about a minute left. Let me hit you with a question or two. We've got just a couple more that have come in. One of the questions, it says, as some states are opening up more quickly than others, how do you manage the risk of employees from a personal travel perspective traveling to hotspots or other areas?
Yeah, definitely have heard this a little bit, and it all gets back to difficulty in managing what employees do on their own time. But what you can think about are your procedures in terms of asking employees who are traveling to consider the safety and well-being of others, and perhaps work from home after that point. And that goes back to that probably more flexible and more extensive work from home policy that you may have not even had at all before, but something that's different than what you had before, that allows people to have that avenue to stay away from your workplace if they did have a reason or desire to go to a hotspot.
So last question, I'll hit you quick, and then we'll we'll end it. So, or turn it back to you, is around, you know, what I'll call specialty circumstances. So we've got an example of a retail store that only has a couple of people in it, or a business that has branches where you've got a limited number of people, things like that. Are there unique considerations that people should be thinking about in those circumstances?
A couple angles there. I think one is making sure people feel connected and informed, so that two-way communication from the center, from the corporation, can be critical in using different tools or devices. A lot of times those aren't people who are on their computers all day, like many of us here might be. So what can you put in their hand, perhaps on their mobile device, that allows them to feel heard in terms of communicating challenges, even ideas, is important. And then also, as some of the safety protocols go, you know, making sure they understand what's expected with them, maybe without as many people watching out for what they're doing. And then really, in terms of the contact tracing and area for that, is really what our clients are often doing there, is really using scheduling information to understand who worked together in the event that a case of COVID-19 was self-reported by an employee, using that to make the notification.
Perfect. I think we're at time, so I'll turn it back to you, and I know Sandy may have a couple of words.
Well, guys, thank you so much, Julie, Brian, and Ray. Fabulous information. I hope the audience got as much out of it as I did. You know, as someone who runs an organization, this was really terrific. So thank you for sharing your thought leadership. Ray, thank you so much for joining us. I know that you and I both had calls right up to this, so thanks for taking the time. Brian and Julie, any final words for our audience?
I'll just mention, we crammed a lot into here. We've given you some links in the presentation. I believe they'll be on the website as well, of what was both a paper as well as the surveys that informed a lot of what we were talking about today. So you'll have those available to you, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions.
Julie said it well.
All right, perfect. With that, I will thank all of our participants for joining us. We had a great audience today in terms of numbers, and obviously a lot of questions. Brian, thank you for monitoring all those questions. We'll remind everyone on the line that if you go to detroitchamber.com/COVID-19, you'll be able to access all of these documents that Julie, Brian, and Ray have referenced in this presentation, as well as upcoming teletown halls on other topics. So with that, Julie, Ray, Brian, thank you so much. And to our audience, thank you for joining us. Everyone, please stay safe and enjoy the rain. Take care, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.